Short section. I thought I'd read something from even before I'd ever contemplated becoming a writer, writing at all. Something from much earlier than that, because I think those of us who go on to do complicated and sometimes creative things, it doesn't begin with the first time if you're a writer, it doesn't begin with the first time you pick up a pen and say, I'm going to write a story. And if you're a painter, it doesn't begin with the first time you pick up a brush. There's something else going on that leads you to that. So I thought I would try to identify what kind of thing that is, what kind of messages you start to get in your head before the urge to paint or write or make a film. Or any of those things happen. So this is right at the beginning of the creative process, which was for me in 8th grade. And it begins with the section of the very long piece in here that was mentioned, I won't be reading all of it, called Getting Good. Can you all hear? Okay. I was in junior high, as middle school was called back then, when I heard my first live band. The venue was the same gym where we hormone-driven 8th grade boys ran laps, climbed ropes, played dodgeball, and wrestled, and in the process converting our recent cafeteria lunch, half a ham salad sandwich and a shallow bowl of Campbell's tomato soup, into methane gas. I had been to dances before at the YWCA, but in that smaller gym, a DJ spun records. This was different. Hearing the same songs that I listened to on the radio thundering through guitar amplifiers, the insistent bass thumping so hard that the bleachers vibrated, was a revelation. I all but levitated. This was for me. The boys in the band were older by 2 or 3 years? 4 at the most, but an eternity back then. And cool? Dear God, their longest shiny hair was slicked back on the sides, their pompadours somehow dangling down over their foreheads and swaying to the music's urgent beat. They wore white shirts and narrow ties, dark jackets and tight pegged pants. When they stepped up to the microphone to sing Baby What'd I Say, they seemed almost to whisper into the mics, but their voices boomed and echoed off the walls. Pulses and crackles of their low-slung Fender guitars, seemingly disconnected from both the fingers on their left hands, which flew over the frets, and their barely moving right hands as they picked and strummed. The songs themselves were not perfect, like the more polished, heavily orchestrated versions played on the radio, but to me, they were so much better. Hearing the former, you would smile and nod your head. In the gym, never mind the wafting aroma of dirty socks and sour jockstraps, you could sense in every ringing, echoing note the thrilling proximity of something you couldn't name or even describe. Freedom was part of it, but more than that, power. Music played this loud by tall, lean boys showed even the school's thick-necked bullies what mattered and what didn't. Though trying to look nonchalant, they hung on every note as hungrily as dweebs like me. The boys behind those roaring sunburst guitars altered our world and in the same instant ruled it. It would be decades before I would want anything as much as I wanted to be one of them. Before that 8th grade moment, my most fervent wish had been that my father, long banished, might return to the house that my mother and I shared with my grandparents in an upstate New York mill town. Afterward, there were things that I needed more than him. And an intact family. I needed a guitar, an amp, a mic. What do you do with such visceral yearning? Well, if all you have is a cheap acoustic guitar, you start saving money from your after-school job for a cheap electric one. And after that, you somehow manage to buy a second-hand amplifier about a quarter of the size of the ones in the gym. Everything that comes out of that amp sounds fuzzy because some other boy with an identical urge to yours has blown one of its 2 tiny speakers. Next, you join forces with a kid who dreams of being a drummer and whose parents have promised him a kit for Christmas, and another boy who also plays guitar. His is better than yours, and he has a decent amp. When the drummer gets his drums, his parents let you practice in their basement. Somehow, somewhere, you locate a couple of microphones, which means that both mics and the guitars are now plugged into your one good amp. It takes you forever to find the setting that does not result in ear-splitting feedback. Your drummer does not think of the band as a collaboration so much as a competition between members. He wants to bang, and so bang he does. The song he's beating out is only tangentially related to the ones that the guitars are playing. He works himself up into a frenzy of wallops that do not take into consideration where you are in the song or its slow build towards climax. Sometimes he doesn't even notice when you stop playing. He just keeps pounding until he is spent. He hates ballads because he is not permitted to work himself into his preferred ecstatic state. You suck. But you keep practicing. The drummer takes lessons. He improves. You all do, though it's hard to tell how much because your needs, better instruments, amps, and mics, are so great, so far beyond your economic reach. Also, you need an audience. You need feedback, and not the kind that comes out of your amplifier when you turn up the guitars and the mics so that you can be heard over the sound of the drums. One of the few things that you need that does not cost money is a name for your band. And so you obsess about that as if it were your only pressing concern. You go through the list of car names, most of which have been taken. Have you arrived on the scene too late? You need to look like a band, and this means clothes. You can't afford those skinny black suits those other boys wore, and even if you could, your parents would never allow you out of the house looking like that. They understand, though, that you are in the grip of something powerful, so they confer and buy you matching fuzzy sweaters. Powder blue. Even though it costs money to enter, you sign up for a county-wide battle of the bands to be waged at the old armory, where 300 or 400 kids will hear you. Even as you set up your equipment long before the first note is struck, you can tell that the other 4 bands will be better. With your 2 small amps, you will not be heard above the ambient noise of the crowd. And a tiny part of you, the tiny part that is tethered to reality, whispers in your ear that this may be a blessing in disguise. You are up first. People are still arriving when you play your 2-song set, which only people standing next to you can hear. Later, your friends drift over and ask you when you're going on. And you have to explain that you already did. No surprise, you finish last. 5th out of 5. Nor, as it turns out, is this the worst humiliation of the evening. Because in the Army parking lot, you watch the boys in the other bands load their instruments into an armada of vehicles. Pickup trucks, vans, rented U-Haul trailers. The winning band has a repurposed hearse. Yours is the only band whose equipment fits with room to spare into one rig, the back of the drummer's parents' pathetically uncool Nash Rambler station wagon. Monday after school, you do a post-mortem. You tell yourself that you would sound better with better equipment, but in your heart of hearts, you know that you would only sound louder. At the end of the week, the other guitarist announced that he's quitting and taking with him your one good amp. Face it, you are a joke. You and the drummer, sick at heart, look for another guitarist. You hear about a Jewish kid who's supposed to be good, and so you give him a try, and he is good. He's been studying classical guitar for several years and seems not to have even heard of rock and roll. You invite him to join the band anyway because there's nobody else. You tell him where his parents can buy the requisite powder blue sweater. Since you are 14, you don't understand that far worse than not having what you need is not knowing what you need. That you need so much better instruments, a sound system that's separate from your guitar amplifier, the means to get to gigs in the unlikely event that anyone would ever hire you, obscures the fact that what you need most, which renders all of your other needs irrelevant, is to get good. Right now, all you've really got is this terrible, relentless hunger to strap on a Fender Stratocaster, plug it into a killer amp, step up to the mic, and make the kind of music that doubles as a sledgehammer. Nothing else matters. Hunger has no business preceding ability, but it does, always, with no exceptions.